Something is starting to change behind the scenes, and if you're really paying attention, you can feel it coming. This isn't about panic or overreaction. It's about subtle decisions being made that could change the team's course sooner than anyone imagines. There are moves on the horizon that may not seem obvious today, but when they happen, everything will start to make sense. And the closer we get to the draft, the more real this situation becomes. But first, click the like button and tell me in the comments how long you've been a fan, because here we have fans of all ages, and that's amazing. Let's go! Something is quietly building behind the scenes in Minnesota, and if you're not paying close attention right now, you might completely miss the warning signs before it's too late. Because heading into the 2026 NFL Draft, there are names on this roster, familiar names, that could be much closer to losing their place than fans might be ready to admit. And the first one? It's not even close. We're talking about Jordan Addison. Now let that sink in for a second, because on the surface, this might sound crazy. Addison is still viewed as a key piece of the offense, a player with real upside, and someone who, not long ago, looked like a lock for the long-term future in Minnesota. And to be fair, there's still a path for that to happen. The Vikings have created enough cap flexibility where extending him either this offseason or the next is absolutely on the table. But here's where things start to shift. There's a growing sense, not necessarily loud yet, but definitely real, that the organization is at least considering alternatives. Not immediately, not recklessly, but strategically. Because the NFL Draft is coming up fast, and wide receiver is quietly becoming a position to watch. Not in round one, most likely. The odds even reflect that. When you look at how the Vikings are projected to approach their first pick, positions like safety and defensive line are leading the way. That lines up with what we've been seeing in mock drafts, where names like Dylan Dean and Emmanuel McNeill-Warren keep popping up over and over again. There's also buzz around edge players like Caleb Banks, suggesting the defense could get the early attention. So where does that leave wide receiver? Right in that dangerous middle ground. Because while it's unlikely Minnesota uses a first-round pick on a receiver, the moment we get into day 2, everything changes. That's where this becomes real. That's where names like Casey Concepcion, Denzel Boston, and Antonio Williams start entering the conversation. These are not just depth pieces. These are players with legitimate upside, guys who could step into a WR3 role immediately and potentially develop into something much bigger. And if that happens, you have to start asking the uncomfortable question. What does that mean for Jordan Addison? Because this isn't just about talent. It's about timing, money, and direction. There's already been discussion about whether the Vikings want to commit big-time money to Addison down the line. Add in the fact that his production dip last season, whether due to quarterback play or not, raises just enough doubt to make decision-makers hesitate. And suddenly, the picture isn't so clear anymore. And then there's one name. One player that keeps coming up as a potential game-changer if he's still on the board. Elijah Sarratt. This is where things get really interesting. Because while there hasn't been strong reporting linking Minnesota directly to him, the fit is almost too perfect to ignore. Sarratt was the #1 target in one of the most explosive offenses in college football. Not just a contributor, the guy. The go-to option when everything mattered. Third down, big games, pressure moments, that's where he thrived. He's got the versatility to line up outside as a true X receiver, but can also slide into the slot when needed. His release package is already advanced, his ability to win 50-50 balls stands out, and his drop rate practically non-existent. Just 3 drops all season, with 2 coming in the highest pressure playoff situations. And stylistically, The comparisons being thrown around are not small. There are shades of Keenan Allen in how he operates. But if everything clicks, you're talking about a ceiling that starts to resemble Davante Adams. That's not hype. That's the kind of upside evaluators are seeing. So now imagine this scenario. Pick 49 comes around, and Elijah Sarrett is still there. Do the Vikings pass on that? Or do they make a move that instantly reshapes the future of their wide receiver room? Because if they pull that trigger, it's not just about adding talent. It's about sending a message that competition is real, that nothing is guaranteed, and that even players like Jordan Addison are not immune to change. And that's why, as we sit here just weeks away from the draft, Addison's name belongs right at the top of this list. Not because he's failing, but because the situation around him is evolving fast, and in the NFL, that's sometimes even more dangerous. So now I want to hear from you. If the Vikings are on the clock in that day 2 range and a wide receiver is available, are you making that move, or are you rolling with Jordan Addison as your long-term guy? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this decision could shape the offense for years to come. And here's where everything starts to come together. Because while the spotlight is heavily on Jordan Addison, he's not the only one feeling the pressure building ahead of the draft. There are other pieces on this roster, quieter situations, less talked about, but just as important when you zoom out and look at the full picture of what Minnesota is trying to build. The second name you need to keep your eyes on is Blake Brandel. Now this one is a completely different kind of tension. Because unlike Addison, this isn't about star power or long-term contracts. This is about role and how quickly that role could change. Right now, Brandel is projected to be the starting center for the Vikings heading into next season. And on paper, that might sound solid. He's experienced, he's versatile, and that versatility is actually one of the most unique traits on this entire roster. We're talking about a player who has logged 75-plus snaps at every single offensive line position over the past couple of years. That's not normal. That's rare. But sometimes, being able to do everything can put you in danger of losing one specific thing, because the Vikings might already be thinking bigger. There's a very real scenario where Minnesota uses this draft to find their center of the future. Not just a temporary fix, not just depth, but a long-term anchor for the offensive line. And if that happens, the ripple effect is immediate. Brandel doesn't disappear, but his role shifts. Instead of being the guy in the middle, he becomes that swing piece again. The plug-and-play lineman who can step in anywhere when injuries hit. And don't get it twisted, that role has value, a lot of value, especially when you consider the injury history across this offensive line. You've got Brian O'Neill missing time here and there over recent seasons, Christian Darrisaw still working his way back from a serious knee injury. Depth matters, flexibility matters. But starting? That might not be guaranteed for long. And when you look at this draft class, you start to understand why. This is a strong group of center prospects, multiple options, different skill sets, real upside. You've got names like Sam Heck, Jake Slaughter, Logan Jones, Connor Colby, and even later round value like Pat Coogan. And here's the key detail. The Vikings don't need all of them to hit. They just need to get one right. Because finding a true center, a reliable, long-term piece, is one of the hardest things to do in the NFL. And if Minnesota believes one of these prospects can be that guy, they're not hesitating. Which puts Blake Brandel in that exact kind of situation players hate. Not failing, but replaceable. And then there's the third name. This one might surprise some fans, especially after what we saw last season. Eric Wilson. Because if you watched the Vikings defense closely, you know exactly what he brought to the table. This wasn't just a solid contributor. This was one of the most efficient blitzing linebackers in the league. 6.5 sacks, elite pressure rates, and a physical presence that completely disrupted opposing backfields. Running backs trying to pick him up in pass protection? That was a mismatch almost every time. He was, without question, one of the hidden gems of the defense. So why is he here? Because the NFL doesn't reward what you did. It prepares for what's next. Wilson is 31 years old, and alongside him, you've got Blake Cashman, a key piece, but also on an expiring deal. And behind them? Depth is a real concern. And when you combine that with the strength of this linebacker class, it creates a situation that's hard to ignore. We're talking about a group loaded with talent. Players like Jacob Rodriguez, C.J. Allen, Anthony Hill, all bringing different strengths, different ceilings, but all capable of stepping into meaningful roles sooner rather than later. So now imagine this. The Vikings decide not to wait. Instead of kicking the can down the road, instead of waiting until next offseason when the need becomes urgent, they attack it now. They draft a linebacker early. They start developing him immediately. And suddenly, Eric Wilson's role begins to shrink. Not overnight. Not dramatically. But gradually. Inevitably. That's how these transitions happen in the NFL. And when you step back and look at all three of these situations together, Addison, Brandel, Wilson, you start to see the bigger strategy forming. This isn't about panic. This is about planning. The Vikings are positioning themselves to stay ahead of problems instead of reacting to them. They're looking at contracts, age, depth, and future value, and they're preparing to make moves that might feel uncomfortable in the moment, but necessary for long-term success. And that's what makes this upcoming draft so critical. Because the decisions made over those few days won't just add players. They'll redefine roles, they'll reshape competition, and they might quietly signal the beginning of the end for certain familiar faces in Minnesota. So now it's your turn. Which of these situations concerns you the most? Is it the uncertainty around Jordan Addison, the potential shift for Blake Brandel, or the long-term outlook at linebacker with Eric Wilson? Drop your take in the comments. And if you're enjoying this kind of deep breakdown, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Because what happens next for the Vikings is going to be fascinating to watch. Let's go.